It's April 14th, 1912. The RMS Titanic has just struck an iceberg. After a short period, her crew deduces that the ship is doomed. Captain Edward Smith enters the radio office and informs the ship's wireless telegraph operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, of their situation. Phillips immediately begins tapping out distress signals, hoping to contact a nearby ship. CQD, MGY, 41.46 degrees north, 50.14 degrees west. CQD, MGY. Aboard the RMS Carpathia, wireless officer Harold Cottam walks the long walk from the bridge to his wireless office. He'd only been gone from his headset for 20 minutes or so, delivering messages to the officers on the bridge. CQD, SOS, CQD, MGY. Come at once. We have struck a berg. It's a CQD, old man. Cottam raced out of the radio office and ran straight to the bridge, bursting into the cabin of Captain Arthur Rostron. He sputtered out news of Titanic's situation. Rostron, still half asleep, thought for a moment. Then, in a move that would cement his place in maritime history, instructed his first officer to steer for Titanic's position. Cottam ran back to his radio to tell Phillips the news. The Carpathia was coming to rescue the Titanic. On board Titanic, the mood was calm. In the first-class smoking room, a bridge game was in full swing. As her officers and crew attempt to figure out what has happened to their ship, water floods in. One might be forgiven for not noticing the ship was making a distinct hissing noise at the forward cargo hatch, a symptom of air being pushed out by all the water filling in. Those awake were beginning to spread word of the iceberg they saw. All over Titanic, in one way or another, the word slowly began to spread of the ship's condition. The stewards roused their passengers awake, telling them to prepare for the cold and get their life belts on. To some, there was danger present. To most, they had time to spare, and this was just a precaution. Her lifeboats are prepared to be launched, but this takes some time. The bell on the crow's nest rings once, signaling a ship spotted on the horizon. Off in the distance, possibly 10 miles away, sit the lights of a steamship. A smaller tramp steamer, but a ship nonetheless. Fourth Officer Joseph Boxhall attempts to signal this nearby ship using a Morse lamp. The ship's band began playing in an attempt to keep the passengers calm. They played lively ragtime music. CQD here. Position 41.46 degrees north, 50.41 degrees west. Require assistance. MGY. The Iperyanga hears Titanic's messages and heads for her position. She's too far to make it in time. For the Frankfurt, the same thing. The RMS Baltic, which had previously rescued the RMS Republic in 1909, was eager to come to Titanic's aid, but she was too far. The Mount Temple is only 50 miles, but she's too slow. Same with the Burma. The only ship with a chance of reaching her is the Carpathia. Harold Bride aboard the Titanic relays this information to Captain Smith. Smith knows the ship they can see on the horizon is closer than the others, but she's not responding to the Morse lamp or the wireless messages. With no other options, Captain Smith orders the lifeboats to be loaded with women and children. Nearly an hour after Titanic struck the berg, the first lifeboat is lowered. Lifeboat 7 launches from the starboard side. Aboard this boat are 20 bewildered passengers watching a warm, brightly lit up ocean liner get further away from them. It was hard, at this point, to convince passengers to get into the small boats. Nothing would prepare the occupants of this lifeboat for just how fortunate they were. Titanic has just 2 hours before she is at the bottom of the ocean. Meanwhile, the RMS Carpathia steams at full speed. To Captain Rostron, this was a clear call to duty, his first real test as a captain. Stepping into Carpathia's chart room, Rostron charted a course to the sinking Titanic. Rostron knew he would have to get his ship steaming faster than it ever had. Every available stoker was ordered to shovel coal into the furnaces. Every crew member was to be put on duty. Heat and hot water were shut off to divert steam to the ship's engines. Lifeboats were to be swung out, lights to be rigged along the ship's side. Winches and cranes were to be ready to bring luggage and cargo aboard. The ship's surgeons were assigned to specific areas to cater to first, second, and third class. He assigned pursers at the gangways to receive Titanic's passengers and crew, get their names and classes, and direct them to the proper medical check. Coffee, tea, brandy, and whiskey were ready to warm the survivors. The smoking room, lounge, and library were all converted to space for Titanic's passengers. In the engine room, the stokers were alive with energy as they shoveled. Groups of men moved dozens of chairs and large, ornate dining room tables as they cleared public areas out. There was a hurried excitement about it all. No one knew quite what they were preparing for, but a rumor spread that the ship had to be able to take on as many as 3,000 additional people, but from where was a mystery. More and more lifeboats have left Titanic. Several of them were launched half full with the plan to have them come back and pick up more passengers at the gangways on the lower decks. But in the confusion of it all, those lifeboats would never return to the ship. Captain Smith cannot help but stare at the lights on the horizon. Jack Phillips has had no reply on the radio of a ship that close, and attempts to signal the ship have failed. On the bridge, the first distress rocket is fired into the night sky. "10 miles away, on the deck of the SS Californian, Herbert Stone, the ship's second officer, watched the rocket ignite. The ship was stopped for the night, surrounded by icebergs. Not sure what he had just seen, Stone focused on the direction of the flash. He could see it was coming from a large steamer, but couldn't make out who it was. Earlier, the Californian had attempted to signal this ship with a Morse lamp, but had received no response. There had been little urgency on the deck of the Titanic before the first rocket was fired. Most passengers believed this evacuation was all a precautionary effort and that the ship was fine. Only a select number of officers and crew knew the extent of the damage. Bouncy ragtime music was playing, and the ship was sinking so slowly that the list down by the head was hardly noticeable. But the rocket was a clear, obvious sign that the ship was in real distress. Everyone knew the Titanic needed assistance from any ship close enough to see her. Jack Phillips was beginning to worry. He had contacted several ships, but none were near the Titanic yet. The only good news he had received was from the Carpathia, but even she was far off still. But the other ships just couldn't seem to grasp the situation Titanic was in. The RMS Olympic messaged, "Are you steering south to meet us?" To which Phillips responded, "We are putting women and children off in boats." The Frankfurt responded with, "Are there any ships around you?" Then several minutes later, the Frankfurt wishes to know what is the matter. We are 10 hours away. Phillips understandably responded with, "Stand by and keep out." Titanic has contacted as many as 13 ships, some as far as 800 miles away. But only the Carpathia has the chance to save her. The Carpathia and the Californian. Aboard Californian, Officer Stone watched as 5 white rockets had been shot up from the vessel on the horizon. He decided it was time to inform the captain of the Californian, Captain Stanley Lord. He called down from the boat deck to the chart room where Captain Lord was sleeping. Stone informed Lord that he was seeing rockets coming from a nearby ship. "Are they company signals?" he asked. "I don't know, sir, but they appear to be all white." "Well, go on morsing." The language Stone used to communicate with Lord was very clear. There was a vessel on the horizon firing white rockets. Even by 1912, white rockets were to be regarded as a symbol for distress. White rockets, fired at even intervals, could only mean one thing. Californian was equipped with a Marconi system well within range of the Titanic's distress telegraphs. But her radio operator was off duty and asleep, and Captain Lord never so much as attempted to wake the operator to inquire in the ship firing rockets. Aboard Carpathia, spirits were high, but Harold Cottam, her radio officer, was concerned. At 1:45 a.m., he received a message that read, "Come as quickly as possible, engine rooms full up to boilers." Cottam was terrified by what he was hearing. The news was spreading too. Ships within range of Titanic passed the word on to ships outside the range, who spread the word to shore. At Cape Race, Titanic's messages were directly relayed inland to New York and Philadelphia. The word was spreading fast, but Titanic was still alone. By now there are few lifeboats left on Titanic. Shots fired off into the horizon to ward off the anxious crowd. Carpathia's passengers were disturbed by the unexpected movement aboard their ship. Some woke up wondering why there was no heat in their cabin. Others noticed a vibration more intense than they had ever felt aboard, a consequence of running her at full speed. Passengers peered out of their cabins to find crew members rushing around with blankets and mattresses. No information was given to passengers, and in defense of the crew, they had very little information to work off of themselves. Some were told, "There's been an accident, but not to our ship." All they could do is return to their cabins and peer out the portholes to see if a ship would appear on the horizon. But a ship never would appear, as the Titanic was slipping beneath the waves. On Californian, the men on duty began to watch as the ship disappeared. These men would later suggest they thought they saw the ship steaming away. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride had done all they could do until the end. As they exited the radio office, Titanic's band began playing one final piece, "Nearer, My God, to Thee." Titanic sinks. The water temperature was only 28 degrees. It was a stabbing cold. The great ship was gone, and left in its place was 20 lifeboats bobbing around a mass of death and wreckage. Not all of her lifeboats had managed to be launched, as Collapsible D had capsized on the deck and now hosts a litany of survivors clinging to her hull. It was 2:20 a.m. 20 minutes later, Rostron had seen a glimpse of a green light on the horizon. "There's his light!" Rostron exclaimed. "He must still be afloat!" This light was a flare coming off of one of Titanic's lifeboats. A few moments later, crew on Carpathia's bow spotted an iceberg. The ship was steered to avoid hitting the berg. But then, a second iceberg appeared. Then another, and another. She had entered the ice field that had claimed Titanic. The Carpathia dodged these bergs but did not slow her speed. Occasionally a flare would be seen, but not the Titanic herself. Cottam knew Titanic's radio had gone silent, but this could be because the ship had lost power. Rostron tried to keep his hopes up. He was proud of his ship and her crew. But his heart was sinking as the minutes ticked on with no sight of the ship. At 4 a.m., he signaled the engine room, "All stop." Rostron finally recognized the green light as a flare and navigates to take on the survivors. Carpathia's crew maneuvered the large vessel to get up as close as possible to the small wooden lifeboat. Lines were dropped and the boat was tied up. A ladder was lowered and the first survivors came aboard. Now Rostron was confronted by a soaking wet, freezing cold Joseph Boxall. Boxall had confirmed Rostron's suspicions. He had arrived, but he was too late to save everyone. But now, there is no time for what could have been. Carpathia must try to rescue who is left. The Carpathia would stand by the Titanic's wreck site picking up survivors until the late morning. Captain Rostron thought about his options, but at this point, he thought it best to return to New York and bring Titanic survivors to their intended port. 1,517 people perished in the Titanic disaster. Just 703 had been picked up by Carpathia. As Rostron was charting a return course for Carpathia, a ship appeared from the southwest. An exchange of signals followed, and she identified herself as the Californian. Rostron instructed the Californian to stay and continue searching for survivors. She did so for approximately an hour before resuming her voyage. The Californian docked in Boston Harbor with very little attention. A representative for the Leyland Line was awaiting the arrival of the ship and, as soon as the gangway was lowered, boarded. The representative and Captain Lord met in the captain's cabin. What was discussed would never be revealed to the public. As the crew began to disembark their ship, word spread of the Californians' witnessing of white distress rockets being fired. Stanley Lord denied that the Californian was close enough to see the sinking Titanic, claiming that seamen will say almost anything while they're ashore. Many took the captain on his word, and the story of the Californian was almost buried. That is, until the Clinton, Massachusetts Daily Item ran a story titled, "Californian Refused Aid. Former carpenter on board this ship says hundreds might have been saved from the Titanic." Stanley Lord would continue to claim his ship was not close enough to see the Titanic, let alone rescue its occupants. His bizarre decision to not investigate a ship firing white rockets into the night sky would be remembered for decades. he would fail to do so much as wake his wireless operator to see if there were any explanations to the rockets. Some believe his decision to not steam towards the ship firing rockets was done out of self-preservation to protect his ship from the ice field. After all, why should he risk damaging his ship when he was smart enough to stop for the night? The events of that night would turn Stanley Lord into an infamous figure who would be haunted by the disaster for the rest of his life. Battling rough waves on her return trip, Carpathia reached New York on April 18, 1912. New York Harbor was shrouded in a thunderstorm. A crowd began to gather on the Cunard Pier, ignoring the harsh weather. For the passengers of the Carpathia, their adventure was coming to an end. For Titanic's survivors, this was just the beginning of their struggles. The following weeks would see Senate inquiries, media interviews, and shattered worlds. The Carpathia could never return those that had been lost on April 15, 1912. But she would provide a chance for those who weren't. A chance at a new life.